All right.
Thank you. You get a gold.
Yep.
You
Other
get
than
a
that, everything's good on my
yeah.
end.
You get a gold star. I even have notes all over my monitor here to record. To record to do to turn on the record button. I guess I'll have to come up with another process. Anything anything new with the project?
Nope, not too much. We're just doing some final analysis and stuff like that on some data, and so it's going along good.
Good, good. All righty. Let's see. And Danielle, I keep forgetting. Am I pronouncing it right? Is it Danielle or Danielle? Hmm, I hear. And Sam,
I'm here, sir. How are you?
good. How are you? And how things going?
Things are going good.
Good. Good deal. All right. And oh, Judith. So you're from Brooklyn?
Yes, sir. I wasn't born and raised there, but that's where my family put down their roots.
Oh, okay. I was actually born in Brooklyn, but I was about a year old when we moved over to Queens. But yeah, I can say I was born in Brooklyn. Where you
Oh,
originally
wow.
where you originally from, if I may ask?
Oh, well, I was born and raised in Haiti, sir.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right. Yeah, where in capital Port-au-Prince or another part of the
Yes, sir.
yeah, Port-au-Prince.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Wow. All right. Very good. Very good. Okay. Just a couple of things before we get going here. First of all, anybody have any questions? Anything need me to review? Anybody want to bring up anything they want to bring up? Questions? Answers? Okay. Um, let's see. Put on my notes here. Yeah, I just want to go over the expectations for next week. So let me go ahead and pull up the syllabus here. So next week, each team will do a presentation. That's assignment 4.4. So there are basically two components to the presentation: your value stream map or your future state process map, and you'll present that, and you'll identify process improvement and process related measures. So that's one part of the presentation, and then the second part are as it says in the syllabus, the lean theory of constraints for your MVP. ID, the most important limiting factors or constraints that would inhibit the project from achieving the goal, and consider improving early. So anyway, you can read that. So that's basically two parts to it. Um, Probably not going to. I don't. You're not going to be presenting your entire project. So I don't see it being any more than, I don't know, 2 to 4 slides. I mean, maybe more, maybe less. Probably no less than two. So I don't expect, and each presentation will probably shouldn't take more than 5 or 10 minutes. Um, I'd like, if possible, everybody to participate in the presentations, and any question. And also, and just note that these slides, okay, are to be incorporated into your project PowerPoint slide deck, okay, as it says up here. Teams will add the following content to their final team presentations, okay. So once again, I'm not looking to see your entire project presentation. I'm looking to see those two the contents from those two bullet points, and then those slides should then be incorporated into your PowerPoint your project PowerPoint slide deck. Do I have any questions on that? Let's see. I was wondering if you let's see. Let me just answer this question. Well, I'll answer. Jay had asked if I knew how one might how to get the value stream symbols free of charge. I don't know offhand. Your best bet might be to Google it under images and see if you can copy and paste. Also, you might find some of them even in Word, or if you have access to Visio or any of those other programs. The other thing, you may even try to do a Google search on value stream mapping software. The only ones I know have a cost involved, but you never know what you're going to find out there. Does that answer your question, Jay?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I know I've looked several places, but
have you? Okay.
Charge.
Yeah. Yeah. You bet. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's some symbols out there, maybe under Google, and you might be able to do a copy and paste. But I wish I don't know offhand. There is actually what I'm thinking. Have you guys been told about this? It's a phone app that's put out by the Jurin Group. That's the group that will certify your black belt. Called it's Quality Essentials. Anybody heard about that? Yes? No? Anybody?
Never heard of it.
No. All right. Well, I'm going to put it's called
PowerPoint and
yeah,
my own.
It's called put the phone. It's called Quality Essentials. You can download it from the Google Store. In fact, let me just double check that. It should still be out there, but let me check. I don't want to tell you something. You can download something and all of a sudden it's not there. So let me double check here. Yep, it's still out there. Yeah, so it's called Quality Essentials. If you do, I'm not sure about the iPhone, but on an Android phone, if you have access to the Google Play Store, just put in Quality Essentials. I don't know if you can see this, but that's what it looks like on the Google Store. Anyhow, the neat thing about it is it's got. In fact, let me see if they've got something on the web. This might help as far as symbols. So let me do something here. It looks like it's on the Apple Store and on the on Google Play. Let me see if they've. Yeah, this is what it looks like, and it's really neat. It's got some really good. Everybody can see my screen, right? But anyway, it's got a bunch of templates. It's got hang on. Come on. It's like a little toolkit for quality professionals. It's got how-to guides on there, and some of the how-to guides include. Come on. Analyzing data, collecting data, control processes, graphical analysis, lean statistics, and things like that. There's also a quality handbook, and then there's tools and templates on there. I mean, some of these things you might be able to use in your world of work, and maybe even in your project. The classes that I've mentor, like mostly the bachelor's classes, I always tell them about this particular app, but I'm trying to see if there's anything out there for value stream maps. But there's all kinds of templates out there for which some of them you already have, obviously, with data collection, process control plan matrix, a SIPOC template, voice of the customer template, an FMEA failure mode analysis template, all this, and these are all in Excel. So all you have to do is download them off the app. Let's see what else. There's some training videos. There's also PowerPoints. Things like 7 tips to transform your culture. Conducting successful transformation deployment reviews. Really neat tool. I encourage everyone, if you have a smartphone, to download it and at least at least check it out. I don't see anything on there. Let me double check for as far as symbols for value stream. Let me see. Barrier, change management, control, process, SIPOC. And one other thing. Let's see. Yeah, don't see anything, but I'll put that. It's called Quality Essentials. The Durand Group. Okay. So anyway, all right. So we did that roll call. Everybody's clear on the presentation for next week. So I wanted to ask. You've all should have read or almost finished reading The Goal. What do you think about the book? And the concepts, and speak freely about it. I'm just curious to see how you all felt about it. I don't get any royalties from the book or anything like that. I don't get any T-shirts or coffee mugs or anything like that. But I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about it. If anybody would like to articulate those.
I'd say the narrative and how it was written from like a story instead of the bulleted points. Chapter 1 is all about this section. Chapter 2 is all about this section. And so the story mode kind of threw me off at first, but it was actually really interesting, especially how the author himself is one of the characters as well.
Right. Yeah, I remember when I was had to read it. I thought it was just going to be another dry management textbook, and I was really surprised with all the how it was written. Yeah, I had gotten the same impression. Anybody else?
I also liked the way it was written as well. It really kept me intrigued because, again, I thought reading it was going to be dry, like you're saying. Mm-hmm. And it kept me engaged, and I wanted to keep reading it. It was really interesting the way it was written, and with him being one of the characters in the book too.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
I liked it as well, sir.
Okay.
And I even got it as a audio book.
Oh, did you?
And
okay.
Going through it's really, really interesting as an audiobook because it's not one person making the voice, it's several different people, and as they looking at it, as they talking, you can actually it's like you have a book in your head as they go through the steps, and in regards to management, what he's doing for the plant and everything like that. It was quite interesting to actually hear them and understanding the process that they're going through. I liked it.
Okay. What about his theory? The theory of constraints. I mean, is it something you found relevant? Is it something you think down the line, or even currently, you might be able to use, if not in totality, but certain pieces of it? Or is it something that is just way too abstract and thought it was basically a waste of time? Thoughts? Comments? All right. Any other comments on the book?
I think the theory itself is, and it can be applicable. It's just I'm used to the operating system that they have at our job.
Sure.
It's kind of seen in different terms, so having to readjust for that, but it's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked for assignment 4.1, I like the way some of you, especially those of you not in the manufacturing sector, were able to, it's some of the concepts in there are somewhat abstract, but I like the way you were all able to apply it to either your projects or even to your world of work. Especially the areas like communications, and then some or waiting on customers, or with some of the logistical problems. So and I think that's where the value of it. I think that's where the value of it comes through. So even if you're not in manufacturing, everybody faces constraints in really any kind of industry, and I think if it makes you cognizant of it, I think that's a good thing, because as you read the theory, you learn how to you learn how to work around it, how to subordinate it, and things like that, and that really can apply to a lot of different aspects of any organization, and really any of these concepts, whether it's TQM, the theory of constraints, ISO, Lean Six Sigma. The positive thing about any of these programs is it really forces you to look at your organization and look at your key processes. And anytime you're able to do that, and you have the tools to really do the analysis that these different disciplines give you, I think that's a good thing. Whether you use theory of constraints, Lean Six Sigma, it can make an organization aware of its processes, and really put an organization on the road to improvement. So I think in that respect, it's a good deal. No matter really which of those disciplines you use, I think that they all have positive effects, and we'll all using any of these tools will help you become successful change agents in your organization. All right, let's see what else I got up here. Okay. Yeah, David, you pointed out that on the assignment it mentioned the EDU 366. I'm glad you brought that up again, because I sent in a correction about that a while back when I taught the course before. So obviously they still have to correct that. But thanks for bringing that to my attention. All right. Let's go on to lesson 4. Oh, there's a couple of videos I want, before we get into it, there's a couple of videos dealing with the theory of constraints that I want to show you. I think they do a good job of kind of explain the concepts, but in a slightly different manner. So if some of the concepts in the theory of constraints are somewhat abstract. This may help to clear it up. So I'm going to go ahead and do those, and then we'll get into the lecture. So give me 1 second here, and I will pull it up. Oh, wrong one. Oh, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Yeah, this one is explains the theory of constraint, but it does it in an interesting way. So I'm going to go ahead and roll that.
The purpose of this demonstration is to visually show the impact that the theory of constraints and the principles of optimized flow can do for your business. I call it the oiled wheels approach to organizational improvement. A 1.5 liter bottle is filled with water, and in order to empty the bottle, all the water has to flow through this bottleneck. The demonstration covers 3 scenarios, using 3 identical bottles but differences in the dynamics of the flow. In each demonstration, please observe carefully what happens. Firstly, what happens in the bottleneck itself, the dynamics of the flow through the bottleneck, and secondly, what are the dynamics in the rest of the system that is inside the bottle.
Let's look at the 3 different scenarios. In the first demonstration, the bottle is overturned to allow the water to run out by itself. The clock starts when the bottle is overturned and stops when the bottle is empty. What do you expect to happen? It takes about 18 to 20 seconds for the water to run out at a rate of about 4.5 liters per minute. Let's look at what happened. Firstly, in the bottleneck. The water started to flow, but it creates a vacuum inside the bottle. This vacuum caused the flow to stop momentarily and allow a bubble of air into the bottle. The air relieved the vacuum inside and caused an equivalent amount of water to flow through the bottleneck. This process repeated itself until the bottle was empty. It is a continuous repetition of stop-start flow. Secondly, inside the system, the result of the stop-start flow is turmoil inside the system. There's a lot of activity, but it does not increase the rate of flow. There are lots of unproductive conflicts, many internal processes that do not add value, and a system that becomes a captive of its own internal processes. It is a demonstration of the world of local optima. In the second demonstration, the bottle is overturned and then given a few good turns to generate a swirling motion. This generates a vortex that allows air to flow into the bottle while the water runs out through a swirling spout. What do you expect to happen? Will there be an improvement? Observe closely what happens in the bottleneck as well as what happens inside the bottle. It takes about 11 to 13 seconds for the water to run out at a rate of about 7.5 liters per minute. This is nearly double the flow rate of the first demonstration. What happened this time? Firstly, in the bottleneck, it took a second or two to get the water to generate the vortex. The vortex allowed the air in while the water ran out in a circling spout. The water and the air each had its own path, and this created continuous, uninterrupted flow through the bottleneck. Secondly, inside the system, all the water particles were aligned in the same direction and created aligned flow. Everything was subordinated to the generation of directional flow. This is a good demonstration of the theory of constraints in a physical flow environment. The third demonstration. A straw is now added to channel the airflow. The bottle is overturned and air is blown through the straw to clear all the water from the straw. The pressure from the blowing also starts the process of flow. Take note that the straw has reduced the capacity of the bottleneck. What do you expect to happen? The clock starts when the air is blown through the straw. It takes about 4 to 5 seconds for the water to run out at a rate of 18 liters per minute. This is about double the flow rate of the second demonstration and about 4 times the rate of the first demonstration. What happened this time? Firstly, in the bottleneck, the flow was super fast. It was stable, without interruption, and more than 4 times the rate of the first demonstration. Secondly, inside the system. The inside was characterized by calmness, stability, and absence of turmoil and pressure. Is it possible to have superflow within a spirit and culture of calmness? Yes, it is done by doing the right things right. The demonstration with the 3 bottles illustrates the following lessons. Firstly, in the 3 demonstrations, the bottleneck remained the same. It illustrates that the theory of constraints is not a process of debottlenecking the operation. It is a process of increasing the flow through the bottleneck. Secondly, if you follow the right approach, you can eventually get both superflow and a spirit of calmness simultaneously. In order to do this, you need to address the physical flow and the people aspects of the business simultaneously.
Applying the principles of the theory of constraints and optimized flow can significantly improve your business.
All right. Any comments? Does it kind of put this whole theory of constraints into a little bit of a different light, or make it maybe a little less abstract?
I think so, sir. It's like being able to identify the constraints, finding ways to take care of it, make the process easier on the organization. Or as they showed with the straw, that was quite ingenious. Actually, I never even thought of that. That was quite enlightening experiment.
Yeah, same here. I guess maybe I was absent that day when in physics when they went through that. Anybody else comments on this? Yeah, I think really the takeaway is there's obviously the bottleneck is a constraint, and they didn't do anything to actually change that, the bottleneck. but they made changes to it, just like they did in the goal, and they were able to take constraint and work around it and improve the flow without physically changing it. So I think it's just I think it was just a good way of presenting it, because sometimes I find sometimes with some of these concepts, if you see it in a different light or see in a different format, it just makes it a lot much more clear and understanding. The other one, any other comments on it?
That's a pretty cool visual depiction, as you said. Reading it verbatim from a book unless you have a big imagination, can only help you out so much. But that's a really good way to observe it.
Yeah, I thought it was. Maybe it may be a little bit of an oversimplification, but I think it brings the concept across. So, anyhow, there's another one I want to show you also. That is basically it's the drum buffer rope in theory, and we also cover that in the slides. But we're gonna go ahead and run that one now.
A very high level overview of throughput accounting. We have not gone into detail of that. We are left with one more concept which we need to cover in this topic of theory of constraint, and that is drum buffer rope. So the drum buffer rope is a method to synchronize production to minimize inventory and work in progress. So when we say constraint is something which will decide the throughput of the overall process. Constraint is something which is restricting. In our example of 3 machines making 60 pieces per hour, 30 pieces per hour and 60 pieces per hour, the second process, which was 30 pieces per hour, was a constraint. That is something which we need to make sure that doesn't stop. That particular process should be working at its best efficiency. So even though we say that inventory or work in progress should be minimized, even though we say we should have one piece at a time, but for constraint, you need to have some buffer before constraint, because you don't want to starve constraint in any case, because your constraint should keep on working to its maximum. So when we say drum buffer rope, buffer is the inventory which is in front of that constraint. Then what is drum? Drum is the constraint. The constraint itself is the drum which sets the pace of the whole process. Because in case of 60 pieces, 30 pieces, 60 pieces, this second process was something which was setting the pace of overall process. And the material or some minimum level of inventory which is lying in front of that process is the buffer. And then what's rope? Rope is the signal that when this inventory goes down, the inventory in front of constraint, when it goes down, rope gives a signal to the front to release more products so that the inventory in front of constraint again goes up, again goes to that required level. So rope gives the signal. If this doesn't make much sense, let's look at the next slide where I've shown this thing in the form of a picture. So let's look at that, and I hope that will make more sense. So here I have 3 processes: process number 1, process number 2, process number 3, and then the process number 4 is shipping.
Here in this case, my process number 3 is a constraint. Process number 3, let's say in this case, process number 1 produces 50 pieces per hour. Process number 2 produces 50 per hour. Let's say process number 3 makes 40 pieces per hour. And that's all we can ship. So what we can ship is 40 pieces per hour. Now since process number 3 is constrained, so this is drum. This is the one which is setting the pace of the whole chain, pace of the whole line here. So this is the drum. And then in front of drum, we have a buffer here. So these are extra units which have gone through process number 2. We need to keep a certain level of inventory in front of the drum, in front of the constraint. Now what happens is, suppose there is some unbalance. There is some stoppage of work in process number 1 and 2, and this buffer keeps on reducing. In this picture, for example, I have shown 5 pieces in buffer. So if buffer goes down to 3 pieces, then there is a mechanism which sends the signal to the front of this chain to release more products, just to give them a warning that the constraint will very soon be suffering from the shortage. So release extra material. So that's the rope. So with this picture, probably you can be more clear about what a drum, buffer and rope system is. So this completes our discussion on theory of constraints.
Okay, be back in 1 second. Hang on. All right. Any comments on that video? I think it does a pretty good job of just summarizing that the drum rope concept. I think it does a pretty good job of simplifying it. All right. So no questions or comments on it? Okay. So, lesson 4. What is the theory of constraints? And of course, you already know that it was developed by Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt. Unfortunately, he had an untimely death a few years ago, so unfortunately he's no longer with us. But and as you can see, it challenges really a lot of assumptions in how we manage business and organizations. Instead of just produce, he really takes it to another level as far as really managing production and trying to develop a continuous flow. So, what is the theory? So in his words, in every real system, like in a business, but could be any kind of organization, business, or any other process. There's usually one constraint, and if this was not the case, the system could produce an unlimited amounts of whatever was striving for profit in the case of a business. So, just about everything, all processes do, and according to his theory, have some constraint that really prevents the process from being the best that it can be. And our job is to overcome that. According to his theory, is to overcome that constraint. And I know in the book it was basically from a manufacturing point of view. Obviously, that's where it got started. But reading your comments from Simon 4.1, you definitely expanded it to where it certainly happens in other areas, in terms of communications, logistics, and things like that, or even customers. In some cases, some of you pointed out were the subject of a constraint. So as we've seen, and as we just saw in the video, it can only system can only produce as much as its constraint resource. So here, even though you've got 5 different departments there, each producing varying amount of throughput, the constraint there is in the middle one because it's just 10, even though the others are 20, 16, 14, and 18. And like you saw in the video, probably in this process, the most they're going to be able to complete and ship out to the customer is going to be 10. So the takeaway here is the maximum speed of the process is the speed of the slowest operation, like we saw just a minute ago. So you can make all the improvements you want upstream, but it's totally wasted unless the bottleneck is relieved. Kind of like we saw with those bottles. You can pour as much water as you want. You try to get the water through that bottleneck, but it's not going to flow any faster unless there's some kind of a change made to the constraint. And consequently, since it is the constraint, it basically serves as the pacemaker, okay, or the drum. So. And lastly, upstream production faster than the constraint will increase work in process, because if you're producing 20 and then you're moving it downstream and the constraint can only process 10 at a time, well, you're going to have a work in process of 10. So unless you subordinate the process upstream to that of constraint, you're going to have work, and you're going to have a buildup of work in process. And as we learned before, work in process increases inventory, and inventory is one of our 7 deadly wastes. We know what happens with excess inventory. It gets lost, it gets shop worn, it's got to be maintained, it's got to be counted, and things like that. It's an additional cost to an organization, and sometimes it's a hidden cost, but it is definitely a cost to an organization. So, what we try to do, if we're adherents to the theory of constraint, is we want to identify the constraint and exploit them to the extent possible. Like you saw in the first video, he exploited this. He exploited the constraint. Tried a couple of different methods to exploit the constraint, and he was successful in attempts number 2 and number 3. But the third attempt, when he put the straw in, he hit the jackpot. But the key there is to identify the constraint. so management can take action to alleviate it. And as you're reading in the goal, that's sometimes easier said than done. Okay, so it may look easy in theory, but in reality, finding the constraint it's not always so obvious. So the other assumption is that it can't be changed in the short term. So you ask what is achievable with current resources that will maximize profits, basically probably doing a cost-benefit analysis, and reduces capacity. It also reduces capacity even though the line could produce more, thereby increasing sales and profit. We all want to obviously increase sales and profit, or in the world of a nonprofit or in government, not necessarily you're not increasing profit, but to be able to accomplish the mission, whether it's military or civilian. So you can have constraints even in the nonprofit world, and because the constraints could cause the organization from not fulfilling its mission or purpose. So so basically what they're saying here, you're either going to manage constraints or they're going to manage you. So ultimately the constraints are going to determine the output of the system, whether you acknowledge them or whether they're managed or not. That's just the bottom line. They are going to, that's really going to determine the output. So how does it help organizations? And I think, and as I mentioned before, sure, theory of constraint can help companies, just like Lean Six Sigma can help companies, ISO 9000 can help companies, even going back to TQM can help companies. I think any of these methodologies that raise the consciousness of organization and process improvement will have huge payback. So in terms of the theories of constraint, it focuses improvement areas where they'll have the greatest impact on the bottom line. And to a certain extent, I think that's what you're all trying to achieve with your projects. You're looking for improvement efforts that have the greatest impact on the bottom line. In other words, you're going to recommend and implement solutions that are cost effective and have the greatest benefit and impact on your organizational's bottom line. You want to get a return, a very high return on investment. And then also providing a reliable process that ensures follow through. So, what are the 5 steps? First of all, identifying the constraint, and that can be time consuming, and that could take a lot of study and observation and good data collection. So that's easier said, in many cases, easier said than done. So then the next step is, how are you going to exploit the constraint? And then also may take a lot of trial and error, and also trying to, and also I think one of the important things to do there is also to get the people that are involved in the process involved in trying to exploit the constraint. In other words, the frontline supervisors and the frontline workers in a process. And then subordinate everything else to the decision in step 2, because if you don't subordinate the constraint, you can only set the throughput is only as good as your constraint. And you want to elevate the constraint, make everybody conscious of it, and then go back to step 1, but avoid inertia. So it's really within the spirit of process improvement. And if you look at it, if you go back to what you learned earlier in the program, plan, do, check, and act, that's really what you're doing here. So you're identifying the constraint, gets kind of the plan, and do is decide how to exploit the constraint, probably 2 and 3. Check, elevate the constraint, and act. Actually act would be elevate the constraint, and then you go back. So really the 5 steps of the theory of constraint are pretty much like PDCA, plan, do, check, act. So the three concepts here are the drum. That's the bottleneck, beating to the pace of production for the rest of the system. So if you imagine somebody just beating constantly on a drum, boom, 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 the bottleneck is going to set the pace because your throughput is only as good as what the bottleneck or the drum will allow. And then the second concept is the buffer. So that's the inventory placed in front of the bottleneck to make sure it's always kept busy, and it determines the output or throughput of the system. So, and as you saw in the video, you always want to make sure that there's enough of a buffer there so that the bottleneck or the constraint is constantly producing or is constantly kept busy, and there's no interruption in the throughput. and the rope, and it's not a physical rope, but it's some sort of a communication signal to tell processes upstream when they should begin production. And we saw in a previous lesson there's many different types of signals that they could use. Might be a hand signal, might be a red light, yellow light, green light, something like that. So there's certainly different ways of communication signals. So here in this particular case, you got process A, the throughput is 15, process B 20, and then a buffer, which is the constraint, is 10, and it goes up to 18 and 16. And when the buffer gets too low, a signal that goes out to the through the rope that you need to increase or maybe even decrease production. So what's the benefits? It's been proven through research that it can reduce lead time by an average of 70%, which is pretty significant. Anytime you can make things good, faster, and cheaper, that's the way to do it. So reducing lead time, making stuff happen faster, that's a good thing. Reducing inventory, that's a great thing. One of our 7 ways. Reducing operating expenses, whether you're in a for-profit business or in a non-profit business, everybody has their eye on reducing operating expenses. Improve on-time delivery, 44%. Increase revenue an average 63%, and better control. So how does the drum buffer rope support lean? You don't build it until you need it. Because it's a pull system, you minimize or eliminate overproduction. Leather gird's one of our 7 deadly wastes. You minimize inventory because only the buffers, they're only at the constraint. Transportation can be reduced because the unbuilt material isn't going anywhere; it doesn't move, so you're not wasting time moving stuff around. Processing weight is minimized because of unbuilt material. There's unnecessary motion is decreased because you don't build what's not needed. Waiting time is eliminated, and and this is important, defects are avoided because of a small lot. You're not, once again, one of the evils of work in process or of excess inventory is that defects could be hidden, whereas in a smaller lot, they're a lot easier to find and to see. So in the theory of constraint in the scheduling procedure that is incorporated with the theory of constraint, of course, you identify the bottleneck. That's probably the heavy lift right there. Schedule the job first, whose lead time is the bottleneck, is equal then or equal to the bottleneck processing time. Forward schedule the bottleneck machine. Backward schedule the other machines to sustain the bottleneck schedule. And once again, small batch sizes than the process batch size. Then, so the solution is, identifying the bottleneck machine. Some process times will operations be formed on a machine, and of course the bottleneck is the longest time. Schedule the first item whose lead time is less than or equal to the bottleneck processing time. Forward to the schedule to the bottleneck work operation, and back schedule the other operations. And then remember that the batch size doesn't have to equal the process batch size. And here's an example. Operation J of item I performed at machine center K takes T minutes to process. So there's an example of scheduling right there. So here you identified, they've looked at the three machines. They see that demand is 100 product of A's, and the machine setup time is 60 minutes. And as you can see, in this case, the bottleneck is in machine 2 because it's taking 26 minutes. So there's your bottleneck. In this particular case, we're not talking about throughput now. We're talking about time. So the machine time is 60 minutes, and the 26 of it is in machine 2. So here's an illustration of forward scheduling the bottleneck and backward schedule the non-bottleneck. So the cumulative minutes to produce 100 items, and you can see the completion time is 2,737 minutes. So you consider the total time available for production is for processes A, B, C, D, and then compare that with the total available production time. So you got the time required for production over the time available production time, and this also includes the setup times. So the time required and you can see to the right the time required for the first changeovers, and then use any excess time for additional setup, because it's all within the constraint of the total available production time. And you split the lot sizes when extra setups are included. So basically, you're splitting the lot size for C, and then you're adding the changeover. So once again, you're adding changeover as time allows. Let's go. So once again, you split the lot sizes when extra setups are added, like we're doing here. Did it for B, C, and D. So basically, in mixed schedule, you schedule to the lowest common denominator. So in this example, your constraint in this example is machine C. Note that the batch size for machine C is the smallest at 13. Machine A and D will round it up. This production design will produce all 50 units in 104 minutes. Without this design, you would have a wait time of 47 minutes, 68 minutes, and 50 minutes. So it is a considerable amount, or a considerable decrease, as you can see, by the use of this type of scheduling. So, David, I think your organization, from what I've been reading, has the theory of constraint, has a constraint with the heating process. Is that what it is?
It's heat treating.
Heat treating, yeah.
Metal. Yep.
So can you kind of, I know you've respond to the questions, but that's your biggest constraint. So maybe you could share with us how you overcome that constraint and.
So yeah, the biggest problem with that constraint is that each process, each step in the heat treating process takes a certain amount of time. So when we release work orders to the floor, we release them in 6-piece lots, but we can fit 18 pieces in the furnace. So what we do is we build them in 6-piece lots, but we end up putting 3 lots at a time in the furnace because the furnace takes to get it through the heat treat process, it takes 3 days. So we can actually keep a lot of lots moving on the floor, but the constraint ends up being the heat treat furnace. Even though we can put 3 lots in at a time, it still ends up being a constraint in the long run.
Okay. So what have you done over a period? Have you done anything over a period of time to overcome the constraint or to work around it, or is it just one of these things where, hey, it's just a fact of life type of thing?
It used to be better because we controlled the heat treating process at one time, and now the customer has actually put more constraints on that. And when they did that, they actually made the heat treat time that parts had to be in the furnace longer. So it actually, when we had it, we had a cadence where we could get so many parts done a day. And now it doesn't work out in a 24-hour span correctly. So we end up taking a day and a quarter or a day and a half. So it throws the cadence of the continuous process flow. It throws it out of whack, especially when we get up to the weekend, because before we could do a process every day. And then if we were shut down on the weekend, it was okay. But with the new process where you might only get 3 batches done a week, you have to run over the weekend in order to catch up.
Oh, okay. All right, so, okay, thanks. I think, let's see, Jay, you're Air Force, right?
Yes, sir.
So you were, I believe you were talking in your response, you were referring to, what were you referring to, logistics or supply as the constraint? Can you kind of expand on that a little bit and how you guys work around that?
Talking about the logistics, that's because the aircraft we have is brand new aircraft, and the military doesn't actually, we don't own the parts. The vendors still keep control the parts. So they like to hold out until they get the highest bidder. They know these parts break.
Mm-hmm.
But as if the Air Force controlled the parts like we always do, we could keep it in the supply chain. We could fix it ourselves and keep it rotating.
Okay. Let's see. Somebody also, thank you. Somebody mentioned in their response, I can't remember who it was, unfortunately, about the customers. They're being the constraint. Somebody, maybe it was Matthew. Somebody mentioned it. I guess maybe it was Matthew. Okay. So when do you use? So when can you use theory of constraint? And like I said, I realize some of your organization and industries, it may not be applicable, but I think some of the, as I said, some of the concepts that there is always constraints in every process, I think is certainly has an overarching effect on many different organizations. So But according to the actual theory of constraint, so a poor candidate are made to order or custom built, and that's because you don't have that continuous process flow. You've got a low volume. Demand could be very erratic. It might be very seasonal. Because it's custom made, resource dedication is difficult, and there are a lot of because of the customization, there are a lot of variables to plan and achieve smooth flow. So you're probably not going to see in a situation where there's a lot of customization. Something in an area where it's make to stock. If you have consistent demand is consistent, you have a high enough volume, and seasonal variations can be leveled. And you can also you can use safety stocks for demand vacillations. So it might work. It may work in that area. Probably the ideal area is assembled to order, where you have synchronized production given reasonable volume, regular and steady demand, predictable options, and the automobile industry is certainly is a good example of that. Anybody think of any other industries where you think theory of constraints could apply? I think sometimes, to a certain extent, even sometimes in retailing, it might even though there's a lot of seasonal demand there. I think sometimes in retailing, when the stores get a lot of merchandise, but they can only process they can only process a certain amount of merchandise at a time before getting it to the floor. And if you can't process that merchandise, it builds up into the stock room. It doesn't get out on the floor, and you lose sales. So I think that's also, I think to a certain extent, you can apply some of the principles of theory of constraint in an area like in retailing, and maybe even in a restaurant, your constraint might be in the kitchen getting the food out fast enough. So I think there's just different ways, may not be pure theory of constraint, but I think there's certain applicable parts of it that could be used in other industries. But like with everything else, everything has an upside and everything has a downside. So there are issues with theories of constraints, just like there are issues with Lean and Six Sigma and any other process improvement methodology. Everything's got an upside and a downside. So the issues there is upstream operations must provide only what the constraint can handle, so they have to be managed carefully to avoid inventory buildup. The downstream operations, the one closest to the customer, can only receive what the constraint can put out. Okay. It's got to be kept operating at full capacity. If not, the whole process starts to slow down. So it constantly has to be monitored. It's a negative impact on unconstrained areas because it diverts attention from other areas that could turn out to be the next constraint, and that's why it's a continuous. You have to once you identify the constraint and you've resolved it or overcome it, you still have to go back and re-examine the whole process again for the next constraint. And also, you have to manage the constraint. You might have the temptation to reduce capacity. It ignores long-run considerations of introduction of new products and continuous improvement in non-constrained areas. So basically, it takes attention away from the introduction of new products and also from continuous improvement in non-constrained areas. Because even though an area may be non-constrained, it doesn't mean that there could still be room for improvement to make it more efficient and or more effective. So you really don't want to, if you spend too much time on the constraint, you may be losing some really some key process improvement opportunities in non-constrained areas. So you sometimes you can just, I think one of the issues with the theory of constraint is it's just it's a lot of focus on that constraint, and then what we're saying here is it can take attention away from other important aspects of your business. Can lead the organization away from strategy, and definitely not a substitute for other accounting methods. And as you remember in the book, that was certainly one of the big issues. So the advantages of it, and the people that are, of course, adherents of the theory of constraint, will that certainly the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. So improves capacity decisions in the short term, avoids build-up inventory, that's aids in process understanding, and I think that's really important. And and that's just certainly not with the theory of constraint. It's with any process improvement or organizational change methodology. It aids in process understanding. Even if you've never heard of the theory of constraints, I mean, if you're knowledgeable on Lean Six Sigma, total quality management, any of these other areas, certainly, or the Toyota production system, it would certainly aid in process understanding. It also avoids local optimization and improves communication between departments. So, how might you apply the theory of constraint to your project? So I'm going to change that a little bit, since some of you were in, obviously we only have like maybe one or two organizational point of contact. So I'm going to ask it in a different way. So how might you apply the theory of constraint to your world of work, not necessarily to your project, or to your project, which pretty much focuses on one organization. And anybody from their reading, studying on this, think that, hey, some of this really may work in my world of work. Does anybody get that light bulb going off? Nobody could see how maybe there are elements of theory of constraint that could apply to your organization or to your world of work?
I would say education and knowledge as a whole, particularly because a lot of the times it's either tribal, something is updated, but not everybody's aware of it, or some people are behind, and so it's kind of tough to get everybody caught up. So everybody has the most updated current knowledge.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
For my organization, I would say, looking at TOC, I think as it applies to our issue that we've had to face, improving communication between departments has been one of the key things, because we have two sections that pretty much complement each other with the level of work that we have to do. However, due to lack of communication, sometimes we have a lot of overflow information that bogs down the process. Everybody's stepping on each other's toes, on each other, not communicating. Then that's usually one of the major issues that we have to take care of. So looking at theory of constraints and how to apply the solutions, I think trying to improve communication between the departments is one of the big things that would take away from that.
So you're saying, Judith, that lack of communication between your two departments is the constraint in achieving whatever your goal is or whatever your outcome is?
Yes, sir. Information flow and being able to, because our customer expects top level of information, I mean Intel. So within the sections working together, improving our processes is key. Being able to all be on the same page, constantly communicating with each other is key to success. So that's.
So you said you're in Intel?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. So how do you think you could overcome this constraint? Any ideas? Your communication constraint?
What we've done, sir, is trying to identify where the communication gaps are, what has been hindering us communicating better with each other. And upon identifying that, we have, through working groups and establishing new processes, seeing, okay, if it's an email, like we receive a ton of information through email, being able to identify who's taking care of that and passing on the information to the next level, because everybody tends to read the same things and draw different assessments. So how do we make sure we break that down, we identify who's in charge of what, and from there, how the information should be flowing, then we'll be able to fix that problem, communication problem.
Okay. Well, thank you, Judith. Anybody else? Like I said, we all have, there's all constraints in every system. So anybody else have, through their reading and understanding now of theory of constraints, can see how elements of it might apply? Okay. So a little bit of a review. So we discussed this probably in lesson 1 and 2. We've talked about value streams. Basically, a set of all action includes non-value, value added, non-value added, business value added, where you have a non-value added activity, but that's required. Is required to bring a specific product or service from raw materials through to the customer. And all organizations have value streams. You're all producing or providing some sort of goods or services, and then you'll have departments, support departments like human resources, accounting, purchasing, that also have their value streams that or have a family of value streams. As I mentioned before, the value stream in human resources, or let's say human resources, might be the value stream might be benefits administration, payroll, recruiting, things like that. And you said they should be introducing value to an organization. Now, these value streams may not always be efficient and they may not always be effective, but they are value streams. And as members of the organization, we as employees or even as owners should be value added. Okay. So we discussed this before. We've got different types of value stream. As I mentioned before, if there's a product or a service for a customer, there is a value stream. And you just have to challenge lies in seeing it. And as I said before, it may not be efficient and or effective, but that's where you come in to make it more efficient and more effective as a quality professional. So basically, from an enterprise level, you have 4 different kinds. Basically, raw materials, the customer product, manufacturing, that's probably the most obvious, customer service, service delivery, including sales and marketing, concept to launch, which would be engineering, in order to cache will be the administrative functions. See, these are all value streams from an enterprise level. So how do we identify the value stream? Or really, it's to learn to distinguish value creation from waste in your whole value stream process. So you're really putting on the waste glasses. What we're really doing is just really focusing on the value streams, choosing a product family. Okay, like I mentioned, human resources, those three areas I mentioned might be a product family. Assembling the team and taking a walk together up the value stream might be, and probably physically walking up the value stream. And then, as you've already done, drawing a map of what you find. Get back to the old tired cliche, but it's true. A thousand pictures worth 1,000 words. And really, you consider, I've seen situations where people will be discussing a problem with a process. There's no map. There's nothing there. And people are talking and talking and talking. But there's a lack of understanding because most people are visual learners. So if you have a good map of a process, it's going to be a lot easier to get your point across because, like I said, it's been proven most people do better with visual visual prompts. So why do we go through the process of value stream mapping? So it helps visualize more than one single process level in terms of value. And this is the second bullet's really an advantage of value stream mapping as opposed to process mapping, but it links the material information flow. It provides a common language. And also the symbols that you use are common to value stream mapping. It can be used as a blueprint for implementing process improvement and for identifying them, and also for getting quick wins. Could be more useful than in this particular case, probably more useful than quantitative tools. But you certainly need the quantitative tools to develop key metrics to ensure that any process improvement you make are measurable. And it ties together lean concepts and techniques. So mapping the value stream, we understand the whole picture, and that's important. You can see where the waste is and where it's originating, and really when you're doing it in a group, when you're working with a group and doing a value stream map, it really opens up a lot of eyes, and I guarantee you, if you ever do it with a group, you'll come up with a couple of easy, quick wins. It brings details to the service, links material flow to information flow. It also generates a lot of really good discussions. I'll tell you, when I've done some value stream mapping, we've tried to determine what was non-value and value added. We've had some very spirited discussions because what may be value added to one person in a process, somebody else may consider it to be non-value added. And of course, somebody who's working in an area that's non-value added is probably going to defend their turf to a certain extent. And it's an effective way of communicating what we learned throughout the organization. We used to have, we had about 80 to 100 processing teams, and at least once a month, one of them would come and would present to senior management a process map and really explain the process to the senior leadership. And it was a great exercise because, once again, instead of people talking back and forth, we would have one of the team members do the presentation, and it really opened up people's eyes. And in certain cases, we were able to get decisions made quickly because they could see it on the map and they could see, oh, wow, we could do this, without, getting an active Congress. So there's a lot of benefits, and that's not only with value stream mapping, but it's also with process mapping. So in the current state map, you've already been doing this. You document the customer information, doing a quick walkthrough to identify the main processes, fill in the data boxes. And initially, when you do the data boxes, it may be an estimate at first, but you should eventually go back and try to get some good hard data. Then you're drawing the inventory triangles and count inventory if inventory is part of your process, documenting supplier information, establish information flow. How does each process know what to make next? Has it communicated verbally, through email, carrier pigeon, signals, whatever? Identifying where the material is being pushed and quantifying the production time, the lead time versus the processing time. We went through those definitions. Anybody remember the difference between production lead time and processing time?
This is Sam. Lead time is the time, I guess, that it takes to prepare to start the process, and then the processing time is how long it takes to complete the process.
Well, actually, the lead time is the entire process from beginning to end. Okay, so when you, as an example, they get the order in to the time it's shipped is the lead time, and the processing time is it goes through each of the individual processes. So there may be 3 steps in the process. So that's basically what the difference is. But the important thing is the lead time is for the entire cycle from the time the order is taken to the time it's shipped. So I would encourage everybody to review those definitions. So this is a current state producing a product. You've seen this in your Learning to See textbook. So this is a current state value stream map, and it said you can see that the lead time is 23.5 days. That's from the time they got the order in to the time it was shipped, and then the value added time is basically the time that it was actually going through each of the steps in the process. The stamping time, for instance, the cycle time was 1 second. But then there was a changeover time of 1 hour. So the actual value added time is really where the kind of like the pedal hits the metal. This is where you're actually doing something to a certain extent. You're not waiting, you're not changing over, you're actually doing what you're supposed to do. In this case, it's stamping and welding. So you can see to do the welds, it's only 38 seconds, but to get to that point, it takes 10 minutes to change it over, and that just gives you the number of shifts and the amount of time available. So that the actual value added time is 38 seconds, but all this wait time, the majority of any of these processes is a non-value added time, which is mostly in this case waiting. So in developing the future state, identify all of the steps currently required to move products from order to delivery. And then you're going to ask, why is the step? You might even use the whys. Why is the step necessary? Would the customer think the product is worth less that this step could be left out? These are questions you could be asking as you go along. Some of these things, they say many steps are only necessary because of evolution of processes. And, a lot of times, because of bad systems, you have workarounds and things like that. And sometimes these workarounds, people look at these workarounds as being innovations, but they're really not. These workarounds are because there's lacking in systems. Maybe there's poor information being generated, databases that are not connected and things like that. So I've seen cases where somebody gets rewarded for a innovation, but it's really a workaround. So that's involved in developing the future state. And that's future state, and you can see they've reduced the lead time from 23.5 days to 5 days. Basically, just doing asking the questions and implementing and piloting the changes. In this particular case, they've eliminated a lot of the wait time and a lot of the work in process inventory. So there, the supplier loop there is 101.5 days of coil inventory. And that's basically it. So you've already done value stream maps. Can anybody share some of the challenges they faced in doing these maps? Difficulties, roadblocks that you ran into? You feel like you're putting a square peg into a round hole?
I think when I was doing mine, when we were doing ours, it was just deciphering what was non-value and what was value added.
So you had a lot of discussions about that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, not unusual. Not unusual at all. Yeah, it's actually I'm glad to hear that because it's usually not usually not cut and dry. So that I'm glad to hear that. Even though it may not have been fun for you guys, but it's good. That's normal. Anybody else? Nobody had any challenges, difficulties? All right. That about finished a little bit early, but that's that about does it. Anybody have any questions or comments? Everybody clear on what the expectations for next week are as far as the presentations? I'll assume if nobody says anything that we're all clear on it. Still, make sure now we're getting towards the end of this course. There's only one more session, so I noticed there's still a few folks that haven't completed those papers yet. So make sure those get completed, and want to make sure you have if you have any work outstanding that it gets handed in by next week or by next Tuesday, so I can start doing the grading, and you guys can move forward. All right. If there is nothing else, we'll call it an evening, and we'll see you next week. And as always, I will hang around until everybody signs off in case anybody wants to talk to me. You all have a good rest of the week. The code for this class is 601. That's 601.